Hello and welcome once again to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. In this episode, you're going to hear John's story. This is a story that starts in East Germany in the final years of World War II. A young child sheltering under a blanket in a cellar as Lancaster bombers rip through the air. Then follow the deprivations of the post-war era and the repression of the police state that was the German Democratic Republic. Escape to West Germany follows, and while working at Mercedes, the tentacles of the dreaded Stasi reach out to ensnare him. And this is just one of several reasons that prompted John to become a 10-pound Kraut to Australia, where he would eventually end up getting a job at the hydro in Tasmania. Now, there's so much more to tell about John's life journey. It is on the one hand a very personal story, but also gives a real insight into how significant historical events impact individuals. And it's a story which I'm sure you will enjoy hearing in John's own words.
Well, I lived in a fairly low-value area, housing, and it was basically a workers' estate. It was specially built for working-class housing because the town was growing, the population was growing fairly rapidly. But my early impressions were sort of informed by the war action. You know? So when you see 200 Lancaster bombers, each with 4 12-cylinder engines without any mufflers, that's frightening enough, even if they don't drop a single bomb. And there was always a situation where the Allied attack was directed towards a town, so they were flying towards Chemnitz, or the direction you could extrapolate that the target was Chemnitz, but then they suddenly veered off and attacked someone who wasn't prepared for the attack. So we had a lot of sitting in the window and looking up there and seeing a massive wall of bombers. And then there were maybe a dozen German Messerschmitt trying to defeat them, which of course was useless because I had, at the time, the Allied had total air superiority, and we had lots of bombing alarms. That meant going down the basement, and my brother and I, we had a fawn blanket. And my mother, or our mother, said, if you're under that blanket, nothing can hurt you. And obviously you can question that. Obviously it wasn't true. But she said, well, if you get hit with a bomb, it doesn't matter that it was a lie. But we firmly believed it, and we were greatly relying on it. And we even had a situation where suddenly myself or my brother said, oh, Mum, where's our fawn blanket? She'd forgot the blanket, so in the middle of the bombing attack she had to go upstairs, expose herself to all that danger to get the fawn blanket for us. Plauen was subsequently one of the most destroyed cities after Hamburg, and because in Plauen was a company, they built, I think about 60% of the German battle tanks were built in Plauen. So that was a very legitimate target. And you had situations where the school, my brother, I wasn't at school, but my brother was 2 years older. He was at school, and there was a bombing attack, and the teachers dismissed the class when they thought they could get home. But if they didn't get home, they took them and found an air raid shelter somewhere else. Well, we had often a situation where my mother took me, and she went out and tried to find my brother. And fortunately nothing ever happened to him, but one day we found him when they won these houses where they have part of it below ground and the stairs going down, and he was with a number of others huddled under there. And we also found very stressful images where you had And, you know, I never forget that. It's deeply imprinted on me, where you had a woman, she was 4 stories up, the house, and she was standing in the window, and everything else on the inside was like a cauldron burning. So she had she could stay there and burn, or go down and you know, jump and be splattered under footpaths. So, you know, that's some of my early childhood images. We had hand-me-downs, you know, because I had a brother 2 years older. I probably had my first new shirt when I was, you know, maybe 7. You know. Everything else, it went from my brother to me. And that wasn't by any means unusual. That was just a thing at the time that families did, or families of our limited means would have done that. So my brother had this beautiful suit, knitted suit with pom-poms on it, and I always wanted it. And Mum said, well, you know, you'll get it one day. And the day came when she took it to the dry cleaners in the town, and a couple of days later, we went there to pick it up, you know, and I said, Muddy, you know, I was pestering her. And when we got there, they said, oh, it's not quite done yet. You come back this afternoon. My mother said, oh, you know, we pick it up next week. Well, when we got there next week, the whole building was gone. There's nothing left of it. It was totally pulverised. And that was a big disappointment. And I know it doesn't sound very important, but it was a little fellow that had... I mean, this is just your clue, the childhood impression. And when I was 7, I was undernourished. I was picked out from a school class, sort of with a distended abdomen, which evidently is, you know, a well-known sign of nutritional deficiency. So I was put in the camp where we got 1 ham roll a day. Well, we got other things as well, but we got one with real ham and butter and salad in it to build you up.
And what did your parents do at the time?
My mother was looking after the family. She was the housewife, and my father worked. And he worked in the early days, he worked in well, you know, you speak German, a Tonmöbelfabrik. Now, you know how they had these radiograms where you had the radio and your record player and your, you know, no TV set at the time, but he made he's a furniture maker specialising in that sort of product. And my dad, drove a truck to get timber from the forest. He had allocations of trees in the forest, and there was a gang that cut the trees, and my dad's role was to pick it up. So that's what he did. Later on, he was a policeman, and he was a border guard and a policeman, and he didn't last very long there because he couldn't walk slowly enough.
Oh, really?
You know, the police had to walk at a certain pace when they went on patrol. I mean, he would have walked normally if you wanted to go from A to B, but when the policeman was there to show the authority, to demonstrate that the place was patrolled and safe, he had the normal policeman's pace, and he got quicker and quicker, and he just couldn't stop himself, and he was unsuitable.
And was this in the post-war period?
It was in the post-war period, yeah. He had, I don't know whether you want to know this, but he worked in underwater weapons research in a place called Eckernförde, which is near Kiel. And shortly before, well, he wasn't going to get killed in the last days of the war. So before the total surrender, a few days before the total surrender, he got his bicycle, he killed the sheep and boiled it all down, threw the bones away, and he had this big pot of boiled down sheep meat, and he hopped on his bicycle and drove south about 500 kilometres home to his family. And he couldn't get across the Elbe. Well, first of all, he could only travel at night, because if he would have been caught, he would have gone to Russia, probably Siberia, as a prisoner of war. And so he could only travel at night, and every bridge across the river was guarded, heavily guarded. Well, this was wartime measures. And he went all the way to Dresden, nearly Dresden, Meissen, Dresden, and he concluded he couldn't get across the river, so he went back up. And he went all the way back up.
That's a long way to go.
It's a long way to go. And he went to a place just north of Hamburg where they had a sort of a Villenviertel, sort of a bit of an upmarket suburb. And while he was there, he thought he'd better go and see a friend's wife, because the friend got killed, and she didn't know. There was a time when the normal system of your commanding officer writing a letter to the widow and say your husband was a hero and he died, and he might have ended up blown up with just a bit of red foam on the wall, but that was the thing. But he thought he'd better do the right thing and see her and tell her what his last words were. And she had got a job with the Americans who issued coupons, or the office, she was the secretary of the officer who issued the coupons that allowed you to go across the bridge. So she gave him one of the coupons, and he could get across the bridge, and he eventually came home. But he had on his bicycle, he had patches on it, the tyres were totally worn out, and had bits of stuff wrapped around it. But he got home. So he came, and I remember that very vividly. We were in a long queue because in our area all the services had broken down. There was no electricity, there was no water, but the civil authorities put by that time one tap for an area maybe like this central part of Blackman's Bay. There was one standpipe with a tap, and you went there with whatever you had, a bucket. So my mother had 2 buckets, and I had one of these teapots, and help her carry the water home. And Willie, my father, came along on his decrepit bicycle. The area of Ploughman was liberated by the Americans, and the Americans left the area after 70 days. So we had 70 days of American occupation, and from then on till 1989, Russian dominated, or the Soviet Union then. I found the Russians behaving in a more legitimate way, or that they did their administration with more integrity than the Americans.
Okay.
Now, you had something like a Russian soldier, they had very little. And you could see them march, and they had their tunics. They put their hand in, like that, spitting out here. What they had was sunflowers. What's their lunch? Was sunflower seeds.
Right.
That's all they had. The Red Army was very poor. I mean, they were winning, but they were exhausted by the time they got to be the occupiers. And when a Russian soldier got a bit fresh with some of the young girls, the girls, you could ring up the commandant door, and they came and picked that soldier up and got stuck into him. It was such brutality that people didn't even adopt them in anymore. because they said, well, they want him to behave better, but they didn't want him to be so brutally treated. But they did it because they had orders from above, or from the Red Army leadership. We want to be an example that we're better than the Nazis. Whereas under the American system, it doesn't matter what an American did. He could behave in a far way in front of 50 people, but they would never acknowledge it. They would always deny it. And, they couldn't do wrong.
What do you remember about going to school in that period?
Well, I got to school in 1946, and our school wasn't bombed out, but it was so near bombed out areas that all the windows had gone. The windows were all broken, and that was such a wide condition. There's so many windows broken that you couldn't get glass. Glass was unattainable. When the temperature in the classroom got below, 15 degrees or something, we got to go home. We had no school. I had good attendance of school because my dad made my brother and me shoes. He had obtained an apron, shots fell from a blacksmith. You know how they have this leather apron and they put their hand on it, and after a year it never gets in the wash. It just gets speckish, they say. And he had obtained one of these, so he measured our feet and made a model of and made us both a pair of shoes and cut out a wooden sole, and so we had these shoes, whereas a lot of the other kids didn't have shoes. So when the streets were icy, they couldn't go to school, so they didn't have shoes. So we were lucky. We had shoes. So I finished up getting accepted in a course for building steam turbines, but that would have meant I had to go away from home to a place called Chemnitz. And by that time I was picked out as a swimmer. I joined the swimming club. I played water polo. And that was very convenient because you could have a shower every day. You go to training and you have a shower. And I was reasonably successful. I finished up, I was twice East German schoolboy champion, and I finished up being the youngest player in the East German water polo top league, the Oberliga. I was about Oberliga. I was the youngest player of all the teams, not only from our team.
Of course, East Germany was famous for its sort of sports program, and had that begun at that time?
Yes, it had begun, and I can clearly remember that our centre forward was, in the early days, he was the only person who was good enough to be in the national team, and he had a job as a technical drawing expert, but he never went in the office. He may have marched in his bureau and said, "Good morning, everyone, and how are you?" And then he'd get off the train. He was paid to train. 3 weeks or so after I left East Germany, my mother sent me a letter that was an invite for me to join the East German under-19 team.
In what?
In water polo.
Water polo, okay.
Yeah. So I played as a 70-year-old in the senior league, and they invited me, presumably on the basis of my performance, they invited me to join the under-19. Now, the under-19 was their Olympic teams, and their representative teams were only selected from the under-19. I mean, they had that system, and they were very successful with it. I'm always saying, if I had received that letter 3 weeks earlier, while I was still in East Germany, my future may have looked entirely different. As it was, my parents went on the seaside holiday, and my brother and I went to the west.
So what were the circumstances behind you getting out of Germany?
Well, we didn't get out of Germany, just get out of East Germany.
East Germany.
Well, East Germany was the most cruel but effective military dictatorship that you can imagine. They made the CIA and the KGB look like choir boys. They were just so successful in gradually closing the border. Now, I remember a time when we played league games in Berlin, and we played a game on Saturday afternoon, one on Sunday morning, one on Sunday afternoon, 3 games. But when we had time off, we could just catch the train and go to the West Berlin. You know, it's easy to get away. Just go to catch the U-Bahn and get out in the West German station and fly out, and you were in the West. But that was all closed up, and they sealed the border, not the Berlin Wall, but the border between East and West was just sealed almost, well, not 100%, but very, very tight. And they had a fence, a 5-metre strip that was raked. You could see a mouse run across, and it was very fine, granulated and raked. And then there was a 5 kilometre zone. You needed a green ticket to get in. But they had every so far apart guard towers where they had lights, machine guns, and they had machine gun nests behind the border. They had 3 different commands, and these commands were religiously kept separate. They didn't know each other. And they had the border in Saxony, between Saxony and Bavaria, they had people from North Rhine-Westphalia or somewhere. So there was no friendship. And the patrol the footpath off the 5-metre strip that was raked. They marched 5 paces apart. And if that soldier leading there would have gone over the wall, thrown his rifle away and jumped across the wire fence, the people in the guard tower, their orders were not to shoot the guy who goes over the fence. Shoot the one who didn't shoot the guy over the fence first. And, that was the border. A 3-command issue. When I went out, I just went out in 1957, in the early phase of the border closure, when you could still get across on some story. I forged a letter that I had someone take to the West and mail to me, which was my uncle, asking me to, he had bad luck and he needed someone to help him to bring the harvest in, and would I be good enough to help him? And with that letter, I managed to get across. But that soon, they stopped that. So I became a refugee at age 17 in totally non-dramatic circumstances.
So did you leave just on your own?
I left with my brother because he had a motorbike. Because I had all my money in my jacket pocket up here, and when I went through the border administration, they said, "Have you got any money?" It was prohibited to take East German currency out of East Germany. Mm-hmm. No, I don't have any money. And I walked out, and when I was just about to open the door, the policeman said, "Come back here." And he went like that and said, "What's that?" And the little I had, he confiscated. So I went to the West, I had nothing. We shared a little case, a little leather case like that. Well, we basically had another shirt and another pair of underpants, and not much else. The towns had a system where they gave you a set of coupons which were only valid to buy the sort of the substance of your life, like bread. You couldn't buy cigarettes, alcohol, or, nothing like that, or magazines or, they were value. And they gave you 10 marks if you left their town by 10 o'clock the next morning. So that's how they got rid of you. We might have wanted to say, oh, that looks a nice little town, but we needed the 10 marks to fill up the petrol tank, because your coupons, petrol, you couldn't get petrol on them as well.
Okay. So where did you end up then?
Well, we ended up near Stuttgart, and the motorbike fatally broke down. And long story short, the motorbike went down, and that's why we finished up in Stuttgart. Then had to go to a place called Gießen, where they did the administration for refugees. You were interviewed by an American officer of some kind, and I was allowed to stay because I was under 18. They would have been entitled, even obliged, to send me back because I was under 18. I wasn't officially capable of making the decision to leave East Germany. But they interviewed me, and I finished up with a certificate that my stay in West Germany was granted. And I got a job in Stuttgart with a company called Fein, F-E-I-N, Fein, and they invented the hand drill, the electric hand drill.
What brought you then to Australia?
I had foolishly gone on to smuggle currency, which I hasten to say was not a criminal offence in West Germany, because West Germany didn't recognise the interzone border. As far as they were concerned, they weren't there. They never controlled anyone or interviewed anyone. You could just walk across. And the removal of East German currency to the West was prohibited. Now, when you were in the West and you wanted to go to the East and wanted money, you had to get change at 1-to-1. One West mark got one East mark. But on the black market, you may have gotten at different times something up to 1-to-8 or something. And what I did, I bought a lot of that currency in a 1-to-3 and sold it for 1-to-8 in the East. And of course, that was just totally ignorant, totally naive, and I can't even now think how stupid I was, because one of the group, obviously, whenever you had 3 people together, one of them was a Stasi, either a Stasi member or a Stasi informer. So that was sort of like an unwritten rule. But at the time, I didn't know that. Anyway, I went to the industrial exhibition in Leipzig, the Leipziger Mustermesse, got a pass to go there, and I happily dealt out my money to the people I owed, who had paid me in Western money. And I said, oh, well, that's done. And as soon as I had that done, they came, knocked on my flat, and I was verhaftet.
Arrested, yeah.
Now, I wasn't, well, I suppose I was arrested, but I could go home, I was interviewed, I denied everything. They said to me I was a wonderful liar. And it turned out they had, from when I was 5 years old, my school results they had. Everything I had ever done in life, they had. And they had to descend how much I gave to each of the people, the money. And they took me around. And the operative, his name was Günther. His name probably was something else, but he told me it was Günther. I called him that. And we went around around the town, nicest restaurants, and he said, do you want anything? He said, oh, do you want, want a nice girl? It was all there. And he had a case, it was full of money. And he just put his hands in and doled it out. He obviously had access to unlimited amounts of money, and he didn't have to account for them. He never asked anyone for a receipt and put it down in the book that you disperse and get refunded, as I would have thought maybe you had to. And he did this to recruit me into the East German Secret Service. That became clear, because I was wondering, what are they getting at? And why don't I had thought I finished up in some unsavoury prison camp, because I had broken their law. I knew that, but I was given 100 West marks and sent back to meet them at a certain date in Berlin. And they wanted information about Mercedes-Benz, the works. Because by that time, I worked for a contractor and I had access to all areas of the plant. And you can imagine, I don't know whether you've ever seen the Mercedes-Benz facility in Sindelfingen, but they had 2 power stations on the, 2 of their own power stations. And I gave them certain information. Yeah, and I had no intention of ever going back to Berlin, I didn't. And then on a day I was way up in one of the factory halls, way up in the steel up there putting cables through, and there was a commotion down on the floor. And I said, what on earth, what are they up to? People in suits and, because no one on the work floor wore suits. And it turned out they were looking for me. And I hid, and I immediately went to the office building, and I said I wanted to see one of the directors. It was a bit naive for me to ask one of the directors, but I got to see one of the personal assistants of a director, and I told him the whole story, how I went to the East, how stupid I was, and how I betrayed the company that was very good, and I told him that information. And I thought he probably
put you in
handcuffs on me and escorted me out of the premises. He said, sit down, son. You see, the East German wanted me to feel guilty and used the release of that information to the Western authority to pressurise me to cooperate with them. And that's why I thought the best thing is own up now. I didn't want to be involved. I didn't want to be a spy. But they sent people to university, and they had people in the highest, you might have heard of Guillaume, Chancellor Brandt's second 2AC was an East German spy. But he put me totally at ease, and he said, they know all that already, don't worry. You didn't tell them anything they didn't know already. And it mainly revolved around the West German government paid Mercedes-Benz to have their new production facilities strong enough, solid enough, not only to have a saloon car, but to have a fighting vehicle, not necessarily a tank, but a light wing protection for tank brigades, that sort of class vehicle. It was all built strong enough and wide enough with, the military planners, the state compensated the company for making basically a potential war production plant, and they knew all that. Mercedes-Benz knew that they knew, and there was you can't keep that sort of thing secret. It's too big and too many people know about it. And he said, I make arrangement. He said, you go back to your job and take it from me. If you have the slightest problem with anyone, come and see me. My door is open to you. I make the arrangement that you'll always be given access to me. And, it was good. But I didn't trust the East Germans. They were too cunning. That sort of involvement, I said, Australia, or Canada, it'd be too far away. They won't stretch their tentacles so far. But they did.
Wow.
I worked for the hydro, and one day I worked out in Claremont, and my boss, Stan Godfrey, he came and said, I want you to hop in the car. And I said, well, Stan, look, I've got to finish all this here. And he said, don't worry about that. Let me worry about that. Just put lay down your tools and come with me. And he took me in, and there were two Asia blokes there interviewing me. So that they had somehow come good on their thread that if I don't cooperate with them, I'll be sorry. They'll make life misery for me wherever I go. And they said, they said when I was still in Germany, they said, we can easily grab you, take you to these. And I said, well, no, hang on, we've got the police here and we've got habeas corpus and West Germany is a rule of law town. And they said, so what would you do if two police officers with a police uniform and armed and everything and warrant card come and said, look, my name is Sergeant so-and-so and I want you to come with me. So you finish up in the back of a truck, a bit of chloroform, and by the time you come to, you're in the East. Because the West didn't check the trucks. They could take anything across their line. And they did it to people. They didn't do it to me, but they did it to people. And that long story being very long and boring, that was another reason why I came out here.
So essentially you were coming to Australia to be as far away as possible from the reach of the...
Well, that was one reason.
Yep.
And another reason was that we, the East German refugees in the West, we weren't all that welcome. I can say, I'm not only saying that for the purposes of this interview, people who know me know that I've always said that. I've been received with had a better welcome, received with more dignity in Tasmania than in the West. They always thought these boys from the East, now God knows what they do with our girls, and there was all that sort of innuendo. And in addition to that, there was, as you probably know, Saxony is a Protestant area. I was baptised after the Lutheran faith, and the West is predominantly Catholic. So they knew we didn't go to Mass and the Eucharist, and that you're already suspect. So there was that was a reason. Well, that's the second reason. And another reason was probably that we were young, we sat in the pub and had a few beers and said, everything is crap and things going for worse, let's go and do something. And we decided as a group to go to Australia. And we did. Instead of a £10 POM, I'm a £10 Kraut.
So you went on an assisted migration?
I went on an assisted migration, and I went from Stuttgart on the bus from Sindelfingen to Stuttgart, and then on the train from Stuttgart to Bremerhaven. Mm-hmm. And I think by the time I was in Cologne, my £10 would have been worn out.
So did you come directly to Tasmania?
I went from, and only the other day, Mary and I left from Station Pier in St Kilda on a cruise, and I said exactly 62 years ago, I came on the same pier and went down St Kilda Road. And it was just before Christmas, the same as when I came here in 1960, and we went there by chauffeured limousine to a place called Bonegilla.
The reception centre.
A migrant reception centre, which was absolutely beautiful. Bonegilla was a migrant reception centre. You had your hut, and people said, the huts were dirty. Well, if you had a dirty hut, that's because you didn't clean it. My friends and I, we had a day when we had a big clean of our hut. Because they had all the cleaning, the powders, the brushes, and it was all there supplied free of charge. You got 3 meals a day, you could eat as much as you want, you got 3, but you had meat and 3 veg and pudding, and you could line up as many times as you like, young boys eat a lot and it's quite important. But people said the food was terrible. They forgot that Bonegilla wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a hotel. It was meant to keep you alive and keep you properly nourished, that you do not waste or, contract diseases due to protein deficiency or God knows what. And they had English classes. They had seminars in the central facility every day, movies. They had, a fellow came in and told you about poisonous snakes and spiders, and that they told you what berries not to touch, in the forest, and what to protect and all that. And every now and then they opened up a building where they had little stalls. So if you were an employer in Hobart and wanted a blacksmith or two, you'd go to Bonegilla, have a stand, and they would then announce over the PA system, so-and-so, Mark Thompson, Proprietary Limited, looking for a blacksmith. And if you're a blacksmith, you go down there and they interview you and say, well, what can you do? And, how would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. And you say, well, how much would you pay me? And would I get protective clothing? And, I attended a thing like that for the hydro, and I had worked out that I needed £20. When I had to say how much do I want or what job do I accept, £20 was my mark. And that was 1960. So the hydro offered me £19.17. Okay. And I had already been 5 weeks in Bonegilla, swim out in the morning out on the Hume Weir with my book in a tree branch, beautiful. So I took the job for £19.17. I said, well, bugger it, if I can live on 20, I must be able to live on £19.17.
And what was the work that you were supposed to do there?
Well, the work, what I was supposed to do, somehow they mixed up my brother and me, because he did electrical installations, and subsequently he became an electrical contractor and did his own contracting business. And I was the machine guy, but they put me out to build the distribution infrastructure, and him in the transformer bay.
Oh, right.
So he did what I learned the trade in, and I did what he learned the trade in. But I don't know how I did it, but I fronted up in the morning, they all introduced me, and, there was a group there. And I said, with my 2 or 3 words of English I knew, I said, well, what do you want me to do? Oh, they gave me a toolbox, they gave me a dust coat or something, or a boiler suit. Then they gave me the drawings. And it's a fortunate circumstance, like music. Now you give say an oboist, an oboe concerto, the music, it doesn't matter whether he's a Nigerian, if he knows his music, he can play it. And it's the same with electrical drawings. Mm-hmm. Electrical drawings in Germany are very similar to the ones you get here. So in other words, if you know your way around German technical drawings, you can understand the technical drawings here, and that saved me. So they dumped me off on somewhere on a building which was just a square room. Might have been underground in front of Fitzgerald's in town or in one of the new suburbs. I got the drawings out, switchboard here, right, put it up, cable it up, run cables across here.
And by the sounds of it, at that time your English wasn't all that developed. Is that right?
I knew none when I came here.
Yeah.
We had a young lady on the boat even. I say young ladies, I don't believe they would have been all young ladies. We might have just taken more notice of the young ladies. But they were there to instruct you in English. And they said, anyone who wants to dance with me tonight, unless you ask me in English, I won't dance with you. That's the sort of... And the same in Bonegilla. They had English tuition, but I wasn't, I don't know, I was too irresponsible to take advantage of it. But I knew a little bit, and I must say you know, as you probably know, I take it you speak German.
Yeah.
You know that English and German. It's fairly easy for a German speaker to learn English, particularly if you have a good grasp of German grammar. I know I had some episodes. I changed my name merely for convenience, and not only for me, but I didn't want my children to get up and say, "What's your name?" and you say something and they all laugh. You know how children are cruel. So that was that. But I've never shied away from my origin, you know. Although I could, you know, you had bigots who classified me as an ex-enemy alien, you know, and I think that is a significant point I feel obliged to point out. When you have worked somewhere in a very Tasmanian environment like the hydro, it is very difficult to get the work on Monday when on Sunday afternoon was the 150th program of the year on the Holocaust and all the dreadful things which I didn't endorse, my family didn't endorse. You know, I know all the criminals say they didn't do it and they are noble. Well, you know, it's very difficult. You know, you go into the lunchroom and people talking and say, well, you know, they probably say, oh, you know, he's one of them, you know. I had incidents, I recall, when I was building Albury Street Primary School, a substation. There was a little fellow there playing in Albury Street. And I just said, you know, what's your name and what do you want for Christmas? And it must have been near Christmas. He said, oh, I want a machine gun. Oh, I said, you know, what do you want to do with the machine gun? He said, shoot the Germans. A little fellow like that. I mean, he must have, where did he get that from? And wow. I said to him, oh, yeah, well, you know. And then I said to him, well, I'm a German. That was before I got naturalised in 1975 or somewhere. And he said, well, I'm a German. And it quite surprised him. And I worked with colleagues here whom I respected, and they respected me. And after working together for quite a while, they said, you know, you're the first German I met that actually made me believe that Germans can be quite normal.
And what did you do after the 10 years at the hydro?
I made a mistake of being in the hydro for 10 years because when I was there for, say, 7.5 years, I said if I have another 2.5 years, I get long service leave, which is just stupid. But I had no intention originally to stay in Tasmania. I wanted to go and see and perhaps select an abode elsewhere in Australia, or even go back to Germany, which you could do after you stayed here a number of years. But then I got besotted with a young lady. And Mary told me when she saw me in town digging a trench to install earth wires and cables and that, she said to me, you know, you have the ability to do something better than that. And I said, nah, not me, you know. I never matriculated. I went to school for 8 years. You know, but then Mary convinced me to do a degree, you know, and I did a business degree and started to work for the government, which was good. I worked 27 years for the government after that.
Yeah, in what capacity?
Well, I was a very small Indian, you know. I was senior project manager. That was it's a little bit above project manager, but not much. I worked for the Department of Industrial Development, which had various incarnations and reincarnations. Retired in 2006 after 52 years in the labour force. We had a very big house in Tinderbox, and nearly 14 acres of ground, and when I got Parkinson's, and that was supposed to be our home forever, and it just all got too much for me. If you look out the window here, you can see we've got artificial turf, and a geometrical garden, and I set that up with my last bit of strength, so low maintenance. So I have no wish to go back to Germany. When we sold that place, when we forced to sell it, we had to go somewhere else. You have to live somewhere. And we went all up the New South Wales coast, to Foster, and we didn't find anywhere where we wanted to live. And because we're both German speakers, we looked in Germany, where houses are very cheap, very, very cheap compared to here. A lot of them very low standard dwellings, but nevertheless, you can easily buy something. And where did we go? We went from Tinderbox Road to Blackness Bay. Because, we think this is just the best place anywhere. I can't imagine where I would rather live. And we had the opportunity to, and we could have gone to Italy, because both Mary and I, we wouldn't have had any problem in the absence of Parkinson's-induced cognitive decline. We would have had no trouble learning Italian. So we really could say the world is our oyster. And our true selection was to come here, and we think from here, from our street and the main road up there, that's the trash circle. We can walk to the shop, we can walk to the beach, we can sit out on the balcony and have breakfast, and we have a sunroom, and we've got a lift, and if I can't manage the stairs. So we went for our own comfort and really didn't want to be anywhere else. And then there's the medical treatment. I've got peripheral neuropathy, I've got 2 cancers in remission, I've got Parkinson's, I've got a number of illnesses, and the treatment I get in the Royal Hobart Hospital, I get so angry when people criticise the hospital. I've had nothing but kindness and goodwill from the Royal Hobart Hospital. The people in there, and I've got a medical oncologist, a radiation oncologist. I had a speech therapist because of the swallowing, and I had a tube directly into the stomach because I had a cancer of the esophagus where it joins the stomach, and all these procedures and living with these things. The help I've received it couldn't be any better. The difference is that people live here, they don't know how fortunate they are living here because they've never lived anywhere else. And I have enjoyed the same benefit, but I know about it.
Yeah,
I can appreciate. I can look out and say, "Whoa!"
Yeah, I think it takes being somewhere else to really appreciate what we have here.
And Mark, there are all sorts of little things. We're walking along there, and a friend, and they say, "Oh, look at that house! They painted their house violet. How silly!" Well, I say, what a wonderful thing. You can, if you think your house is a good thing, you like violet, or you paint, you're free to do it. Whereas you go in a subdivision, say in Wuppertal or somewhere in Germany, the block, they all got to be, there is the maximum setback from front and rear and the sides, that always makes every house the same block because they all want to build big. And there's a maximum height, and they all, because the ground area is not big, they all have the same height, And when you take all that into consideration, every house looks the same. And they've got to paint their front door. They've got to get permission to repaint their front door. And, I say, oh, look, he wants to paint his house violet. Well, what a good thing.